They say it could be the sound that saves your life. For the first time ever in the UK, at 3 p.m. this Sunday, the government will be trialling their new mobile emergency alert system. Phones right across the country will sound and vibrate all at once. So why now has the government given this the get-go, and what has been the reaction so far? This is what you need to know. Hello and welcome to today's episode of What You Need to Know. Everything you need to know in a very short period of time. I'm News at 10 anchor Tom Bradby, and I'm joined, I'm very pleased to say, by our political correspondent, Harry Horton. Harry, good morning, afternoon. Let's not be specific. We don't know when people are listening to this, but nice to see you. We're in our brand new little pod here in our brand new ITV News newsroom. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Let's listen to the alarm that is going to sound, as we said, at 3 p.m. this Sunday. Let's just have a listen. There we are. I said at the top, sound that saves your life. Sound a bit like a DJ saying like that, but it's not a song, it is an alert. So Harry, let's begin at the beginning. What is this all about?
This is all about the government having a new tool in which to try and alert people of an immediate threat to their life. And this is a system that's in operation in lots of other countries around the world. And essentially it's that short, annoying sound that you just heard. You'll get a message pop up on screen and it will inform you about some sort of danger that might be nearby that could put your life at risk. And so before this is rolled out fully, the government's going to test it this Sunday at 3 o'clock. And they will send pretty much every smartphone in the UK will get this message. And we'll say, this is a test, you don't need to respond, but we're testing our new alert system. And hopefully, if it works, then it will then be in place to alert people of potential emergencies in future. Now, the government say this hopefully will be used incredibly rarely. But I think it's probably a tacit acknowledgement that extreme weather events and other sort of life-threatening emergencies might be becoming more commonplace in the UK, and this is a sort of more advanced tool for them to alert people of any danger that might be nearby.
Now, I obviously work at the heart of the newsroom. I did know this was happening, but I can't say it's been high up in my consciousness. I suspect there are many, many, many people listening to this who have absolutely no idea this is going to happen. I mean, what do you sense the level of public awareness of this actually is?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I suppose we'll know on Sunday, won't we? When we'll see
everyone is seen staring at their phones, exactly. Completely confused.
Yeah, the government are trying to sort of get the message out as much as possible, so encouraging people to do podcasts like this and trying to get
everything you need to know. Exactly. That's what we're telling you.
Trying to get it in lots of newspapers and on news bulletins. They're pumping out messages on social media to try and warn people ahead of time that this is happening. And that essentially, we can come on to the potential problems people have raised about this on Sunday, but that's basically the main mitigation factor the government has sort of brought in, is to try and make people as aware of possible this is coming.
You said it's in use elsewhere. Obviously, like if you live in America, just to quote one example, you're getting, certainly in parts of America, you're getting quite extreme weather events, quite often hurricanes, people asked to leave their homes. You can totally see that. We do have extreme weather events here, storms or floods or whatever. I mean, is it really about weather, or is it about terrorism and, in fact, a whole bunch of a range of things?
For now, primarily it's about weather. So the government have said that in the first few years of this being used, they see it as, say last summer we saw some wildfires, didn't we, in parts of the UK? We've seen heavy flooding in certain areas. Those are the sort of scenarios where I think the government say initially they're going to use this. Now, it could be broadened out in the future, potentially for terror attacks, for other sort of threats. I mean, in the US, I used to live in the US, and I remember getting these on my phone. I got several for floods when the area I was living in had heavy rain and there was a risk of flooding. I also got them for when children have been abducted and you get a message saying child has been taken away. Now, The government don't plan to use it for those sort of things at the moment. They acknowledge that actually in the US, things are a bit more fragmented. Different states have different rules. They're not looking at that at the moment. Just in the UK, mainly weather events they're looking at. But yeah, in the future, it could be broadened out to other events, depending on what police say over time and how they think this tool could be used in future.
Well, you think about this for a moment and you think, okay, interesting. You can see why, floods, storms, quite often people are caught unawares. You'd think they wouldn't be, but sometimes they are. So you can see the sort of logic to it, but almost immediately as you start thinking about it, you think of potential drawbacks also. Even this Sunday, people not being aware they're going to get it and perhaps responding, in fear or whatever. So we should say that there are some big events going on this weekend, the London Marathon, the FA Cup semi-final that will coincide with the test. That could be potentially problematic. What's your feeling about the drawbacks?
Well, there are some drawbacks. So, those two big events taking place this Sunday, the government has been working with the organisers of those. So it's happening after the London Marathon and just before the FA Cup semi-final. But there are football games on whilst this is happening. So, it will cause some disruption. There's concern about people perhaps sitting in theatres as well. If your mobile phone is switched on, even if it's on silent, you'll get this alert. So, in theatres across the country, they're telling people to turn their phones off if it's going to coincide with this alert test. There's more serious concerns, though. So there's worry about people driving. If you're driving a car and your phone's being used for sat-nav, this might distract you when this goes off. And then also domestic violence charities are worried about abuse victims who, in many cases, have second phones, secret phones that they keep from their partners. Well, if this alert goes off, it might alert their partner to the existence of this phone. So the government has specifically said there is advice on lots of charities that deal with this sort of thing. Specifically, they've highlighted Refuge as one of the websites to go to, and there's lots of information there about what to do if you've got one of these second phones. Essentially, the advice is turn your phone off, and if your phone's switched off, it won't respond to this alert. But there are ways you can opt out of these alerts if you want to as well. So, if you've got one of those phones, if you're in that sort of circumstance, that there are ways you can ensure your phone remains secret.
Well, you spoke to the head of policy at Refuge. Let's just take a quick listen to what she has to say about it.
We're really concerned that the emergency test alert could alert perpetrators of domestic abuse to secret phones that survivors of domestic abuse have to help them contact their family and friends, plan for their safety.
Harry, well, can I ask you to pick up on that, and particularly, how do you opt out if you need to?
Well, essentially, you can go to the settings on your phone, and if you type in emergency alerts, there's an option there for you to turn them off, and that works for both iPhone and Android devices. The government tested this scheme in Reading, and I think somewhere else, I think Suffolk was the other place that they tested it. And there was around...
Not sure what the connection between Reading and Suffolk is, but that's for another podcast.
The test took place there, and afterwards the government did some research to look at just how many people decided to opt out afterwards. And they found around 1 in 20, around 5% decided that these alerts were too annoying or they didn't want to receive them in future or whatever. But from the government's perspective, they say, well, that shows 95% of people were quite happy to remain opted in and keep getting these whenever emergencies might occur.
I can think of some other... one of the things that immediately occurs to me is, well, how come the government has access to everyone's mobile phones? And I'm assuming what they do is come to a deal with the telecoms companies, like you put it out on all your phones. But have there been any concerns about sort of privacy and information and data storage and all these other considerations that one might reasonably raise in this matter?
There's definitely concerns about it. There's concerns, I think, just about people's civil liberties and whether the government should be able to sort of send a message to everyone's phone. But in terms of data and things like that, the government hasn't sort of got access to your mobile number and they can't sort of call you up in that way. The way it works is... the government has a deal with mobile phone operating companies, and from the mobile phone masts, they send out a targeted signal to devices in a certain area. So essentially the smallest possible area they can send an alert out to is about the size of an electoral ward. So it's quite specific. Mm-hmm. So clearly, Tom, if you were on holiday in Scotland and your home here in London was about to be, at risk of flooding, if you were in Scotland, you wouldn't get that message because your life isn't in danger. But if there were some people on holiday from France and they'd opted into their government's equivalent system and they were walking past your house, they might get the alert because their life might be in danger. Mm-hmm. So that's the general principle of it.
You said at the start these have been used elsewhere. What issues, if any, have been, have come up as a result of that? And, where have they been used, and have they been problematic, or have people just largely accepted them, which is why they're being used here?
Well, the government thinks that they have been successful in other countries, which is why they've decided to introduce this system here. I mean, most famously, there was an example in Hawaii where a false alert was sent out saying that a nuclear missile was approaching the island, which caused about half an hour's worth of panic for the residents there.
Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. I mean, what? There are false missiles and false messages and false messages. That seems quite extreme. Was that a hoaxer?
No, it was just an accident, essentially. Someone was fired as a result of it for getting it quite badly.
I was going to say, no kidding.
Yeah, I mean, it was close to starting World War III at one stage, but that was 38 minutes of panic for people.
Can I just say, 38 minutes is quite a long time.
It's quite a long time
to contemplate Armageddon.
I think it was 3 minutes before officials were aware that it was a false alarm.
Right.
38 minutes until another message was sent out to the public to say this isn't going to happen. But again, that was quite an extreme example. I think the UK government would look at this and go, well, we don't think that would happen because we've got the appropriate checks and balances in place. And the reason that happened in Hawaii is because, as I've said, the US has a much more fragmented system. It's run on a state-by-state basis rather than nationally. In the UK, it's just going to be run centrally from the UK government.
From the Cabinet Office, I mean, are they setting up a particular unit to run this? How does that kind of work in practice, or still to be determined?
Well, there is a unit to run it centrally at the moment, but in time it may be that local police forces or local emergency services decide that this alert is something they want to send out because of a particular emergency. For now, it's fairly centralised, but yeah, I mean, in time that will develop and become more local, you'd expect.
It's quite a big step, I would say. I mean, as in it's introducing something, I mean, maybe people will completely accept it. Who knows? I don't sense public awareness is very high about it yet, though obviously we're trying to change that with podcasts like this. With our many millions of listeners, we'll pick up on this. If you're listening, folks, don't worry. It's happening this Sunday. It's not the end of the world. It's not even a nuclear strike, unless they really cock it up, in which case it might be. But, I guess people might say, yeah, we have extreme weather events. We have storms, we have flooding. I mean, to the extent that a message is going to make a difference, I guess that would be a question people would have.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question. I think what the government would say is that this is a message they hope most people will never have to receive, because the chances that they're going to have some sort of extreme event that threatens their life is clearly incredibly rare. This is just an extra tool in their toolkit, in addition to alerting people in person, as the police and fire service do at the moment. This is just an extra way of communicating with people to say there is an imminent danger. You might want to get out of the way.
I'm going to ask you a really tricky question now, because I suspect there isn't an answer, and it sort of takes us to the point beyond which you said this is directed, which is kind of beyond weather events. I was UK editor here at the time of the 7/7 bombing, and I kind of knew from talking to contacts in the security service and the police and so on that there really was a very high expectation of an attack coming, and they kind of felt they weren't going to be able to stop them all, and they were very clear that the terrorist groups had somewhat given up on targeting air transportation at the time, and therefore it was likely to be the tube, the bus, the train. And I was coming into Waterloo to work one day, and I got out my phone to try and, call the office or whatever I was doing, and there was no signal. And then I looked around the rest of the carriage, and I noticed a lot of people looking at their phones. I thought, oh, this is odd. And the train pulled into Waterloo, and I got off, and I wandered through Waterloo, and like it was like some scene out of a movie. Like everyone was looking at their phones, like, you know, like, what the hell, my phone isn't working. And I thought, something's happened. And I ran across Waterloo Bridge trying to get to the office, and the whole way there was no signal anyway, and everywhere you went, people were kind of looking at their phones in a confused way. And they'd obviously, I'm not sure they ever admitted this, but they seemed to me to have shut down the phone signal all the way around London because they didn't know what the heck was going on. So I guess my question is, I presume they've thought about this, but if you come to the point where you expect the government to communicate with you on your phone with an alert when and then you're in an event like that where, like, the government basically doesn't know what's happening. You know, I know we joked about the nuclear strike on Hawaii, but you know, it seems incredibly unlikely that a government realistically would be having the time or the inclination to tell people like that. So after this rambling, longest question in history, I guess my point is there a worry that the government sets up an expectation here that actually in a real crisis, like, you know, not something they see coming like weather, but something that happens very fast and people are frightened and they don't know, you know, I think another one would be the Paris attacks, you know, where I remember going over to Paris after that, the Bataclan massacre, and you know, it was kind of pretty chaotic and scary for 24 hours in the city. People didn't really know whether there was going to be another attack or what's happening. So is there a worry that the government's setting up something here that it actually might not be able to deliver on in a crisis?
Well, I suppose in those sort of circumstances, with this sort of system in place, you can communicate with everyone in a way that was much harder to do before. So it could be helpful in some ways for the government. I mean, they've also said that there's lots of circumstances in which you would never use it in a terror attack. I mean, if there was a live terror attack ongoing, for example, and people were, you know, the instruction to people in terror attacks is run, hide. I forget the third one. Run
and hide is a good place to start.
So if you were hiding away and there was a terrorist nearby and all of a sudden your phone started going off and making all this noise and vibrating, that wouldn't be very good. So there's pretty good reason for the government not using this in those sort of circumstances. But again, I think it depends on who's in charge, who's the operational command in charge on that particular day. This is an extra tool for them to use. Now, whether they choose to use it or not is up to them. And there are good reasons to do so and good reasons not to. And it sort of depends on the nature of the attack, the nature of the threat, and whether or not it's going to help them save lives or whether it's going to put more lives in danger.
Yeah, just, well, I'll finish here because we're obviously getting into the realms of the unknown. But, like, it was kind of, you know, obviously run and hide is a sensible thing. One of the things I noticed I was filming in a cafe after those Paris attacks, and when we were filming, we're just talking to some students. Suddenly there's people started just out of Place de la République, and people just started sprinting past us, like hundreds of people, and somebody came into the cafe and screamed, a gunman's coming. And it was just, you know, I've been in a few chaotic and sometimes violent places, but it turned on a sixpence, and one of the students we were talking to literally picked up this enormous heavy coffee table and hurled it at the window, which of course is bomb-proof, so it didn't actually shatter, but it was absolute bedlam within 3 seconds. And it's kind of a reminder actually that panic sets in very quickly. And I guess you can see with a message system like this, that could be a very powerful counter when people are panicking, to tell them, give them a really specific piece of advice, which I guess leads me to my final point. You know, if this is run by the Cabinet Office, presumably it would be connected to Cobra in a big, you know, so this is a tool of Cobra, or could come out of a Cobra meeting, you know, a crisis meeting involving everyone in a really extreme situation, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a tool that can be used by the government and other emergency services. You know, at this very early stage, as I say, they're just looking at extreme weather events. But yeah, I think it's an evolving system. And over time, as the government starts to see it utilised perhaps in certain areas, they will learn about how it's best used, how the British public respond to it compared to the American public respond to it. So, you know, this in 20, 30 years' time, I'd expect will be much more commonplace, and we'll be used to getting emergency alerts, or perhaps we won't be. Perhaps we won't have had any at all in the last 30 years.
Being British, we just ignore them. We hear from the government.
Who knows? But yeah, I think it's an open question how this evolves over time and how the government decides to use it.
Okay, well, Harry, I'm very pleased that on top of your many other skills, you've become our emergency alert expert. You may not have seen that coming in your career.
Certainly didn't.
I'm sure. So listen, there it is, everyone. This Sunday afternoon, expect your phone to come alive, and don't worry too much about it. It is the shape of the future. That's all we've got time for now. Thank you to Harry for giving up his time to become an expert. This shout out for Anna, our podcast producer, who's sitting in the gondola with us and does all these podcasts very brilliantly. But for now, to all of you, thank you so much for listening. Head over to our